The US military is about to do something insane. This isn't about Iran, it's not about another invasion. Cast your eyes to the skies, because the US is pulling something straight out of Star Wars that is set to ruin its enemies' long-range plans. Those enemies are scared about what the US is about to put hundreds of miles above its territory, and they should be. But there are layers to this insanity. The weapon itself is crazy enough, but the cost, that's on a whole other level of nuts. We're talking, of course, about the Golden Dome project that the US is designing to be its ultimate defense against the current and next generation of ballistic missiles that can be launched by the likes of Russia and China. We already know the basics. Missile interceptors in space will shoot down ballistic missiles at the boost phase during the peak of their journeys, saving interceptors on the ground from having to try to take them out while they're hurtling back down to Earth. But now we have some details. Our first real glimpse at what the Golden Dome will be is here. That glimpse came courtesy of the Congressional Budget Office, or CBO, which released a cost estimate of a notional version of the Golden Dome. Keep the cost in mind, and we'll be coming back to it. But first, CBO says at the core of the Golden Dome will be a massive constellation of 7,800 anti-missile interceptors, all orbiting the Earth in space as they wait to shoot down any ballistic missile threats that come into their sights. Those 7,800 missile interceptors will account for 60% of the total price tag that the CBO has come up with. We don't know the specifics about those interceptors yet. It's not like the US is going to be carting Patriots into space and placing them on the moon. But we do know that somebody is working on their development. That somebody is Lockheed Martin. And it revealed part of its hand in a May 1st press release, where it explained that the US Space Force Space Systems Command has selected the company to develop the capabilities needed to support the Space-Based Interceptor Program, SBI, otherwise known as the Golden Dome. The press release is pretty generic beyond that. Lockheed Martin touts its experience with combat-proven missile interceptors such as the PAC-3 missiles used in Patriot systems, and it talks about adding an early additional layer to the multi-domain layered shield that protects the homeland. But as for what's up its sleeve now that it's been tapped up for the Golden Dome project, Lockheed Martin is playing that card very close to its chest. Wisely, as the US isn't going to want anybody to know how its space-based interceptors work before they're installed and ready to go. Still, we're starting to get a picture of what the Golden Dome is going to look like. An air defense network that is decades in the making is starting to look like a reality, and the Star Wars moniker that dragged the idea down in the past has taken a big step toward looking somewhat real. And it's not just 7,800 air defense systems in orbit that are going to make up the Golden Dome. Remember, the CBO says that they account for 60% of the insane budget estimate that is put forward. Other aspects of the Golden Dome have been touched on by US officials. On April 29th, the Washington Times reported on comments made by Space Force General Michael A. Getline. He is the director of the Golden Dome program, and he revealed what the program is supposed to target. Golden Dome is designed to go after the next-generation aerial threats, which includes unmanned aerial systems against our homeland, cruise missiles, hypersonic and maneuvering hypersonic missiles, as well as ballistics from the air and ballistics from the sea, Getline said. That's a pretty wide net to cast, and even 7,800 missile interceptors in space may not be enough to stop all of these types of weapons. That's especially the case for cruise missiles, which famously hug the terrain rather than heading up into space. The Golden Dome seems to have solutions for that, though much like the interceptors that Lockheed Martin is working on, the details are vague. According to the Washington Times, the Golden Dome will protect all 50 states, and it will include the incorporation of high-tech weapons and artificial intelligence with current defense systems, he said. In other words, the interceptors in space will be part of a massive network of defenses that include America's ground-based air defense systems, electronic warfare, and its cyber strategies. A program unofficially named Missile Defense System Next, or MDS Next, underpins all of this. Our goal is to change the calculus for our adversaries by fielding advanced capabilities for MDS Next at a speed that preserves the warfighter's decisive military advantage, says the director of the Missile Defense Agency, Air Force Lieutenant General Heath A. Collins. If he's right, the Golden Dome is going to be a terror for America's enemies, and there is progress being made beyond the deal that the Pentagon has struck with Lockheed Martin. So far, the US Space Force has awarded 20 contracts to 12 different companies that are worth up to $3.2 billion, Air and Space Forces reports. While the on-orbit missile interceptors that Lockheed Martin is working on are the headline makers from these contracts, others have been awarded to the likes of Northrop Grumman, SpaceX, which we imagine will have something to do with the project through its pre-existing constellation of satellites that power Starlink and Raytheon. The one thing we can say for certain in all of this is simple: the Golden Dome is real. It's happening and contracts are already being awarded. But before we come back to the other insane part about the CBO's report, there's one more nugget of information that comes from the Warzone or TWZ's reporting on the 7,800 space interceptors that the CBO believes will be needed to make the Golden Dome viable. TWZ reports that everything that the CBO has said about the Golden Dome is based on the assumption that the system will have 6 main elements. First on the list, the massive constellation of 7,800 space-based interceptors that are going to suck up 60% of the budget and seem to be the most advanced aspect of the Golden Dome. If the entire system manages to come together, those interceptors are going to be responsible for blasting down ballistic missiles when they're still in the boost phase or in the space-bound portion of their journeys. The other elements cover both the upper and lower wide-area surface sites, then down to regional sectors, and additional self-defense for America's 4 existing surface sites. There is also mention of a space satellite constellation that will be used for tracking targets, which is where we believe SpaceX is likely to come into play. The layers between the space-based interceptors and the satellite constellation all likely refer to the expansion of America's existing land and sea-based missile interceptor capabilities, which includes the likes of the Terminal High Altitude Area Defense System and the Next Generation Interceptor, TWZ reports. So that seems to confirm the overall Golden Dome plan, at least as the CBO sees it. Interceptors in space, backed up by more interceptors on the ground, all of which will be fed with data from satellites, sensors and radars, the latter 2 of which will likely be what the US already has on the ground. A picture is starting to form about what the Golden Dome will be, but we haven't gotten to the really crazy part. As impressive as this system that has been pulled straight from Star Wars might sound, there's the always inconvenient aspect of the cost to consider. The numbers are going to blow your mind. But before we dig into what the CBO estimates all of this will cost, this is a quick reminder that you are watching The Military Show. If you're getting insight from the channel, remember to subscribe to see more of our videos. So, the cost. We're just going to break it to you. The CBO says that to make a version of the Golden Dome that has 7,800 space-bound interceptors and everything else that we've detailed feasible, the Pentagon is going to need to spend a staggering $1.2 trillion for development and deployment and upkeep. And to throw another wrench into the works, the Golden Dome that results from this enormous spending will be an air defense system that is able to operate for about 20 years before it all needs to be replaced. Of the $1.2 trillion that the CBO estimates, about $1 trillion will be needed for the acquisition costs related to the Golden Dome. The rest will likely be spent on getting the air defense systems into place, and then maintaining them while they're orbiting hundreds of miles above America. Personnel need to be paid, maintenance, repairs, and periodic upgrades will be needed. If the CBO is right, the US is going to commit an obscene amount of money to the Golden Dome. But there are a few caveats to these figures. First, as massive as $1.2 trillion sounds, and it is an enormous number, it's not outside the realm of what the US has paid in the past to enhance its warfighting capabilities. According to Business Insider, the F-35 project cost the US upward of $2 trillion when adjusted for inflation, so it's not like this type of spending is without precedent. Another caveat is that the figure is all part of an estimate generated by the CBO, and even the CBO says that it's incredibly difficult to project what the true price tag for the Golden Dome will end up being. Although documents from DoD's budget requests for the 2027 fiscal year provide 5-year projections of funding plans for GDA, details about what and how many systems will be deployed, the objective architecture, have not been released, making it impossible to estimate the long-term cost of the GDA system being contemplated by DoD, the CBO points out. Context: GDA stands for Golden Dome for America. That isn't as much of a boon to the Pentagon as it sounds. Impossible to estimate just means that ongoing maintenance cost of the Golden Dome could be even higher than the CBO has estimated them to be. And we have yet another caveat to the CBO's figures. The Trump administration says that the Golden Dome will cost a whole lot less. When US President Donald Trump announced the Golden Dome concept shortly after his return to the White House, he said that the initial investment needed for the program would be just $25 billion. It's strange to say just when referring to such a large sum of money, but it is a fraction of the $1.2 trillion estimate that the CBO provides. When adding ongoing costs into the mix, Trump said the total cost of the Golden Dome would be $175 billion. Still a big sum of money, but also just shy of 15% of the estimate that the CBO makes. The Pentagon's projections for the Golden Dome rose slightly in March from $175 billion to $185 billion. But the fact remains that there is a huge disparity between what the CBO says all of this will cost versus what the Trump administration claims. So what gives? The CBO has a potential explanation. The US Department of Defense, or DoD's, Stated costs appear to cover a shorter time frame than CBO's analysis and may reflect a different scope of activities and budget categories, the CBO points out. This could mean one of two things. Either the Pentagon, DoD, and the Trump administration have a much more limited scope for what the Golden Dome is going to be, or, assuming the CBO is right, the projections for what all of this is going to cost that have come out of the Trump administration are wildly inaccurate. We'll only know which is which when more concrete details are released about the Golden Dome. And there's one more aspect of the CBO's estimate that's worth mentioning in all of this. As impressive as the headline of 7,800 missile interceptors in space is, there are limitations to the entire network. The CBO says that the space-based portion of its projected version of the Golden Dome will only be able to engage 10 targets simultaneously. That seems like an extremely small number, though there are reasons for it. A ballistic missile in its boost phase only provides a window of between 3 and 5 minutes for an air defense system to take it down. For the Golden Dome to take that missile down, it needs to be in low Earth orbit of between 186 and 310 miles. The problem arises from the fact that satellites in low Earth orbit can't be fixed over specific points on the planet. They're always moving, as they orbit in a band that is centered on the equator and then bound equally from the north and south based on the orbital inclination that is set for them. The issue that this causes is that the US will need a large enough constellation of satellites in the right places to rattle off the missile interceptors needed to take down a ballistic missile threat. The CBO even offers an example. The US would need 20 space-based interceptor satellites to be in the right place if it wants its missile interceptors to fire 2 missiles each for 10 ballistic missiles. For the number of ballistic missiles that can be intercepted at once to increase, the US has to send more satellites into space. That brings the cost up further, likely well beyond the $1.2 trillion that the CBO estimates. It specifically says that roughly 30,000 satellites would be needed to support the 7,800 missile interceptors in space for 20 years. So the US has a challenge to solve here. After all, the Trump administration has made it clear that the Golden Dome is intended to provide coverage against the threats posed by all potential enemies of the US, including China and Russia. The CBO's estimates about what the system will look like seem to be more focused on what it calls regional threats, such as those posed by North Korea and Iran, where it can be pretty easy to predict from where a ballistic missile will be launched. The CBO's conclusion is simple. The Golden Dome would be far better than anything that the US has in place right now, but it still may not be enough to counter a massive launch of ballistic missiles by one of America's most terrifying rivals. Of course, we need more details from the White House covering the specifics of what it intends for the Golden Dome. We know what it's meant to do. We know the CBO's estimate for what this insane system would need to look like. But when it comes to pure nuts and bolts, the White House hasn't revealed much outside of distributing a handful of contracts. As Defense Express points out, there has been talk of the US reinforcing its lunar infrastructure and even creating bases on the moon, which all hints at the Trump administration's ambitions. But concrete details are thin on the ground. But even with all of these caveats in play, America's enemies are scared of the Golden Dome. That's not just us saying it either. In the months that followed America's announcement of the project, most of the nations that you could consider to be its enemies were up in arms about the Golden Dome. North Korea released statements that condemned the idea, calling it an outer space nuclear war scenario supporting the US strategy for unipolar domination, which is typical of American arrogance and self-righteousness. Big words from a country led by an unhinged dictator with his own nuclear ambitions. Russia and China also responded to the Golden Dome with a joint statement, calling it deeply destabilizing in nature, and claiming that the very existence of the Golden Dome will provide more impetus for other countries to develop both kinetic and non-kinetic means to counter the dome. But the real insight into how China and Russia feel about the Golden Dome comes from what it means in terms of the space-based aspects of the future of war. The situation is further aggravated by the fact that the Golden Dome for America program also directly envisages significant strengthening of the arsenal of means to conduct combat operations in space, including the development and orbital deployment of interception systems, turning outer space into an environment for placing weapons and an arena for armed confrontation, the joint statement read. It's here where the fear comes in. If the US can pull off the Golden Dome, in whichever configuration it ends up being, it means that America takes a huge leap forward in the next frontier of warfighting. The reality that neither Russia nor China wants to expose is that they have been making moves to become the dominant force in space alongside the US. Both TWZ and the Georgetown Security Studies Review point out that all three nations have been testing anti-satellite weapons during the last few years, and America's enemies already seem to have put their own missile interceptors into space. China in particular is testing what is suspected to be a geosynchronous Earth orbit capability that could threaten US systems, including GPS, and America's early missile warning infrastructure. So when Russia and China release joint statements about what the US is doing, They may dress it up as America upsetting the global security balance, but what they really mean is that they're not being given free rein to pull ahead in the space war race. The Modern War Institute at West Point boils it all down to traditional warfare terms. It says that for as long as war has happened, those in conflict have always sought the high ground. When you control that high ground, you control the entire fight. That's why fortresses were built on hilltops. Height means better surveillance and the ability to fight an enemy that has to exhaust itself by coming to you. At its very base level, that's what we're now seeing with projects like the Golden Dome. Only the high ground is now literally out of this world. The future of warfare will boil down to which nation is able to position its assets in space before an enemy has the chance to counter or react, the Institute argues. The nature of warfare is starting to change. What was once purely strategic is now increasingly becoming technical. That's been the case for a while now. Modern weapons systems exist because of massive advancements in technology. But what the US is now preparing for is wars that will be fought on a new frontier. The Golden Dome is designed to give America an early advantage in the new arena of warfare. Whether it's actually able to do that depends on how much the US is willing to commit to a project that the CBO says could spiral in cost. Is the Golden Dome a boondoggle or a breakthrough in war? That's the big question, and as you consider what the answer might be, the Golden Dome is far from the only secretive project the US is working toward unleashing against its enemies. In fact, one confidential project has already seen action in Iran. This project has the potential to redefine modern warfare, and you can find out what it is by checking out our video. Plus, if you enjoyed this video, remember to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss any of our analysis on the latest developments in the modern war landscape.